Friedrich Nietzsche and Friedrich Nietzsche's politics. This is a little bit more difficult of a terrain than some. He doesn't have a 10-point plan for totalitarianism like Marx does. Remarkably, people find Marx obscure on this too. But anyone could find Nietzsche pretty obscure or ambiguous or difficult on multiple grounds on political matters. Nietzsche was my first philosophical love. This happens to teenage boys from time to time. It's a dangerous thing. And one direction you can go from there is kind of Ayn Rand and that kind of thing. And you can see how Nietzsche prepares the ground for that. I don't know, you could go the other way too. That would be better if you started with Ayn Rand and ended up with Friedrich Nietzsche, who's an much, much, much better thinker. And I was in love with the incomparable boldness of Nietzsche's voice, the way he wrote. I was enraptured by his contempt for his own tradition and the lightning strike way that he punctured cultural illusions, okay, or common wisdom. He was always like trying to figure out what the common wisdom was and blow it the fuck up. The philosophical common wisdom, the cultural common wisdom, whatever the people around him assumed to be true or took as a bottom line reality in a way, Nietzsche questioned, attacked, showed contempt for. That's an amazing thing, and I think this still amazes me about Nietzsche, what he could do with his own tradition and what happened with that. Like, his influence in the 20th century is just incredible, really, and he predicted it himself, annoyingly enough. There's, like I say, there's a lot to love about Nietzsche. Maybe I'll try to mention a couple things. Right, okay, so the question of Nietzsche and fascism, Nietzsche and the Nazis, has been a question for a very long time. And Hitler declared that Nietzsche was his favorite philosopher. Hitler had a edition of Nietzsche's works bound in blue calfskin and sent as a birthday present to Benito Mussolini. He was already deposed by the time it arrived, Mussolini. And maybe that's appropriate too. Okay, so then, I was aware of these debates from the time I first read Nietzsche in 1973 or something, okay? Because Walter Kaufmann, the translator, and writing the introductions and everything, was all about defending Nietzsche from the charge of Nazism. This was actually a necessary project because there's so much, I think, worthwhile in Nietzsche. And so much that you want to recover, I think, right? But tainted by his supposed proto-fascism, okay? So this was now, I do want to note that Hitler and Mussolini did not select John Locke as their favorite philosopher, didn't go for Immanuel Kant as their number one philosopher. And there are reasons why they might have thought that Nietzsche was on their side. Okay, and we're going to look at some of them here real quick. Would Nietzsche have endorsed the Nazis? I mean, people think they have a real clear answer to this. What did Heidegger do, though? But okay. They think they have a real clear answer to this. Of course not. And I think that it's fair to say Nietzsche expressed amazing contempt for anti-Semitism. But he expressed amazing contempt for Jews, too. He's our Freddy, okay? He would have despised Hitler, I think, as a little dwarfy agent of resentment, okay? Maybe he would have. We don't know, do we? Or maybe he would have seen in Hitler a vision of the Overmensch, and in Hitler's vision, a version of his vision. We can't really know. But probably he would have despised Hitler, okay? And he would have diagnosed the anti-Semitism rather than having endorsed it, or the Nazis' brand of anti-Semitism. All right, but I mean, they're traveling in the same world, okay? And Nietzsche has this complicated, originally very, very close relation to Wagner, and Wagner's widow, and Cosima, and then there's Nietzsche's sister Elizabeth, who I think Hitler met, who was also his literary executrix with somewhat disastrous results. His sister was married to an anti-Semitic proto-fascist leader, who eventually led them on to form an Aryan colony in South America. One of the most comical and ridiculous events in human history, kind of, and disgusting too. All right, and of course Hitler admired Wagner and used Wagner. And if I was really thinking about where Nietzsche gets with the Nazis, I'm going to look at just a couple of passages here. I think about the aesthetics. I think about the dark side and the mystery and the sublimity of Wagnerian opera, but then also Albert Speer's buildings, the Cathedral of Light in Nuremberg at the Nazi party rallies in 1934, okay? The idea of kind of tearing down each city in Europe and replacing it with a sublime neoclassical, crypto-classical, gigantic architecture. The lights in the night in Speer, Leni Riefenstahl's films, the Olympiad. I think the aesthetics of Nazism is something that Nietzsche could have felt. Again, we don't know what he would say. Okay, and the other thing about Nietzsche here is that he's not writing Aristotle's Politics, dude. He's not writing Hegel's Philosophy of Right. He's writing aphorisms, lightning strike aphorisms. They might contradict each other, across a few years or whatever. He's going for striking poetic formulations of these wild, dark thoughts. He's not issuing a treatise on politics. So I think, like I say, just simply condemning Nietzsche as a totalitarian doesn't do the job, really. And I mean, so I guess I'm sort of apologizing for including him, but I also think like he's a direct influence on totalitarian politics, okay? A little like Marx, although no one could really use Nietzsche as a theory of the future like that you could use Marx as. Like it's not going to resolve into a scientific picture of what's going to emerge in the future of humanity, okay? Or even a very compelling justification for a set of values. It's more like kaboom, and then silence, and then kaboom, okay? So I don't, I'm not going to directly accuse Nietzsche of Nazism, totalitarianism, etc. I think we got to be awfully worried, though, right? And I love this thing. I love Nietzsche. The idea of questioning all morality is super powerful. I felt that as a teenager. The way, his dancing or a celebratory sense of rebellious intellection thrilled me. His account of consciousness which happens right after a couple of the passages we'll look at in a minute, and his critique of science, his account of the history of science, what science is for and what's trying to do. Amazing shit, dude. Like, really good. All right. So, I mean, this is a mixed bag. And I mean, this is true of a number of these philosophers. And this is one reason why I could still, with a good conscience, teach stuff that I thought was such a problem. Because, this series of texts that I regard as totalitarian, because there's also a lot in them that is, a lot in any of these figures. I think that any of the figures we've talked about, like, I don't want to say, like, they have totalitarian politics, so, like, erase the whole oeuvre. And I definitely don't feel that about Nietzsche. Okay, but I mean, there's so much good in Hobbes, right? Or just like even models of how to create an argument and shit like that. Hobbes kicks ass, right? But that does not to say that you need to agree with his politics, because you need to disagree with his politics, and you can. I guess I don't get worried about getting seduced into the dark side. But Nietzsche's all about the dark side, flirting with the dark side, this transgressive politics. And, some bad shit can come of that, too. Right? He despised the anarchists. He despised the socialists. He despised democracy. He despised the teaching of human equality. On the other hand, he despised the fossilized aristocracy. He despised the state. This is amazing. Like, he does sustain many interpretations in a way. It's sort of like Rousseau, maybe, who he despised. Nietzsche despised Rousseau. He rags him so hard. All right, but then again, Nietzsche. All right, and Nietzsche attacks. Emma Goldman said that Nietzsche was an anarchist, but she was always appropriating people. But for example, there's a passage in Zarathustra. This is my least favorite Nietzsche book, by the way. It's the pseudo-prophetic, I come to you to speak of the Overman, the Übermensch. Today I proclaim the Übermensch, like, man, I guess I don't want to hear your prophetic voice necessarily, man. Like, write more like you're smashing German poetry or something like that, okay? But there's a passage in Zarathustra called "Of the New Idol," in which he just rags the state with a capital S, kind of, I'm sure, thinking of Hegel and all this post-Hegelian stuff that he's having to tread water in an environment of. The state is the coldest of all cold monsters, and the lie creeps from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. The state lies in all the languages of good and evil, and whatever it says, it lies. Whatever it has stolen. Everything about the state is false. It bites with stolen teeth. Even its belly is false, etc., etc., the state's a pile of rags. I mean, actually, Thoreau uses almost the same sentences, man. Okay, but that's sort of the egalitarian, liberal, democratic sort of state that he's talking about, or the idea of a Hegelian state, which is guaranteed to arouse Nietzschean contempt. I mean, because this is what I admire again about Nietzsche. Underneath the dark side, wild, transgressive pro-stylist, there is a realist, and who hears Hegel on the state as just this fantastic gobbledygook, just this pumping up of illusions like a blimp, like a blob of goo. Right? Like, and he he's actually got his feet on the ground, except for this kind of wild future that he envisions or whatever. And so, like someone who's makes the state a god and is, Nietzsche sees what he's doing and why he's doing it. Right? So you got to give him that. And you think that you go from from there to anarchism, but he despises the egalitarianism of anarchism and of liberalism and of socialism. What I'm going to do, like the very most problematic political material in Nietzsche is probably collected in the volume known as The Will to Power, which itself indicates a potentially very fundamental Nietzschean idea that's potentially so politically fucked up that all we do is the fundamental human impulse is the quest for power, as it is for sex maybe in Freud or whatever, wealth for lots of economists and political economists oriented philosophers and so on. Political economy. All right, so what we're going to do here is the prophetic Nietzsche, the anti-egalitarian Nietzsche, and the Nietzsche who obscurely prophesies a future, talks about what the 20th century is going to look like in Europe. This is from, I'm going to read two passages from Book 5 of The Gay Science, edited by Bernard Williams. Have to give him that, huh? Translated by Josephine Naukoff, Naukkfhoff. Book 5 of The Gay Science, I think, is one of the most important philosophical passages, most important passages in Western philosophy, because what it does with consciousness, truth, science, scholarship, and it also is there's an amazing genealogy of science here, tracing it to ascetic values. Very compelling, but also some epitomes of the darkest Nietzsche political thoughts. Okay, so like I say, I lost this thought. The most problematic passages are from The Will to Power, a set of his fragments, notebooks, notes, assembled by his sister Elizabeth. And, so there's a shitload of Overman shit in there. Okay? If I was in Nietzsche's head, I would just delete this Übermensch bullshit, dude. Like, I proclaim the Übermensch, like, fuck you, I know. I think he thinks it's the next phase in human evolution or whatever, like, and he experiments with little eugenics ideas about it, just like Plato. But not like Plato, because he's got no system, all right? He's just going like, there will be a new breed, a transcendent new evolution, of victorious, physically mighty people who are able to face reality. That's the thing. Like, they're able to affirm reality and create their own values. Okay, I guess I see that. The free spirit is the preparation for the Übermensch. I guess I can understand Hitler receiving that enthusiastically. But we're not going to do the Will to Power passages. Like I say, partly because they are assembled to have this devastating proto-Nazi effect, actually. Although that's not to say they weren't written by Friedrich Nietzsche, these bits. They weren't arranged into that book, though. But let's do a couple things from his very mainline, intentionally published texts. Here's one of the central passages in all of Nietzsche. 343, of Aphorism 343 of the gay science. How to understand our cheerfulness. Our cheerfulness. We, the free spirits. We, the philosophers. We, the premonitions of the new dawn. The greatest recent event, that God is dead, that the belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, is already starting to cast its first shadow over Europe. So, I mean, this is one thing, this is an important moment that when I teach Nietzsche, I taught classes on Nietzsche, or Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, that's an important gloss on what God is dead means. The belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable. To those, and so now, here's the prophetic Nietzsche talking about what, now that we no longer can believe in God and no longer have the values that were given to us by Christianity and stuff like this, or can't endorse them any longer with a good conscience, see that they have no foundation and things like this, unless we're just deluding ourselves in a very almost straightforward way. Here's the cataclysm that's going to follow in Europe. And I mean, this is remarkable about Nietzsche is that he'll take on this prophetic voice, which I wouldn't recommend for any human being, really, but sometimes the prophecies are seem remarkably prescient, not Nostradamusical. Sound like Tony Romo predicting the next play in an NFL game or something like this. To those few, at least, whose eyes, or the suspicion in whose eyes, is strong and subtle enough for this spectacle, some kind of sun seems to have set, some old deep trust turned into doubt. To them, our world must appear more autumnal, more mistrustful, stranger, older. But in the main, one might say, for many people's power of comprehension, the event is itself far too great, too distant, out of the way, even for its tidings to be thought of as having arrived yet. Even less may one suppose many to know at all what this event really means. And now that this faith has been undermined, how much must collapse because it was built on this faith, leaned on it, had grown into it. For example, our entire Christian morality. This long, dense succession of demolition, destruction, downfall, upheaval that now stands ahead. Easy to hear the world wars here. Who would guess enough of it today to play the teacher and herald of this monstrous logic of horror, the prophet of deep darkness and an eclipse of the sun, the like of which has probably never before existed on earth? Who would be the prophet of that? Well, me, actually, Friedrich Nietzsche. And if Adolf Hitler regarded himself as the fulfillment of this prophecy, that wouldn't be very surprising. Right? And it's not completely out of keeping with the kind of shit he's saying here. This is going to be a prophecy of destruction. Even we born guessers of riddles, who are, so to speak, on a lookout at the top of the mountain, posted between today and tomorrow and stretched in the contradiction between today and tomorrow, we firstlings and premature births of the next century, to whom the shadows that must soon envelop Europe really should have become apparent by now. Why is it that even we look forward to this darkening without any genuine involvement, and above all without worry and fear for ourselves? Are we perhaps still too influenced by the most immediate consequences of the event, the death of God? And these immediate consequences, the consequences for ourselves, are the opposite of one might expect. Not at all sad and gloomy, but much more like a new and barely describable type of light, happiness, relief, amusement, encouragement, dawn. The death of God is freeing. If you're a certain kind of person, a person who anticipates the coming Overman who will emerge from the dark cataclysms of the 20th century. Indeed, at hearing the news that the old God is dead, We philosophers and free spirits feel illuminated by a new dawn. Our heart overflows with gratitude, amazement, forebodings, expectation. Finally, the horizon seems clear again, even if not bright. Finally, our ships may set out again, set out to face any danger. Every daring of the lover of knowledge is allowed again. The sea, our sea, lies open again. Maybe there's never been such an open sea. All right, I don't know. That's a little gratuitous. It's not directly political in some ways. But it gives you the flavor, I think, that would connect Nietzsche in an interesting way with fascism. The coming century will be a dark era of cataclysm. We should affirm that. All this egalitarian crapola of the last few hundred years, all the socialism of the 19th century, all the democratic revolutions or Republican revolutions of the 18th century and so on, all this was preparing the way for the death of God, or all that was the death of God, Enlightenment philosophy and science. After the death of God, when we no longer can count on the values, including Christian values, of the value of a Christian value of equality of human souls, that we all have an immortal and intrinsically priceless soul. All of that disintegrates. And now we're in a period of conflagration and war from which, and we should affirm that, war brings manliness and will bring the Übermensch. This is not, he didn't admire Hegel, but this has a Hegelian flavor too, of the prophecy of this is going to, the coming conflagration will bring the transcendent moment at the end of this sorry epoch, and that end is the Overman, the Superman. That has it's kind of like a parody of Hegel, but it's also still has a Hegel flavor, and it also has like a whole 19th century, like I say, kind of millennialist flavor. Marx has a version of this. These are things that Nietzsche would have despised, but they are also things that Nietzsche engaged in his own way. Not with the incredible pretentiousness of a Hegel or Marx, that to say like this is the scientific view of what's going to happen for the next 300 years, but in a much more like bold, poetic set of flourishes. He does something similar, like he calls for the end of history and affirms the cataclysm that will end it. And that might be the way fascists thought about the Second World War. So here's, who are we? He's asked. This is a typical Nietzsche flourish. This is on 377, section 377 of the Gay Science. Who are we, the free spirits, the premonitions of the new prefigurations of the coming century and all this? We can serve nothing, he says, can serve nothing. Neither do we want to return to any past. Okay, we are not conservatives. Definitely not. Okay? I mean, Nietzsche is a radical, right? There's certain things that he loves about various eras in the past, right? But he is a philologist, etc. But he's a radical. He's not a conservative. And we're not conservatives. And we are by no means liberal. We are not working for progress. I mean, this is pretty radical in 1890. It really is, man, because everyone is hypnotized by progress in 1890. We don't need to plug our ears to the marketplace's sirens of the future when they sing equal rights, free society, no more masters and no servants. That's Bakunin's slogan. Is that right? Like, no masters, no servants. No gods, no masters. Well, he would like that, maybe. Equal rights, free society. We don't have any, that has no allure for us. Equal rights, free society. No allure for us. We hold it absolutely undesirable that a realm of justice and concord should be established on the earth. Because it would certainly be the realm of the most profound leveling down to mediocrity and chinoiserie. We're opposed to peace. We're opposed to equality. We are delighted by all who love, as we do, danger, war, and adventure, who refuse to compromise, to be conquered, to reconcile, to be castrated. We consider ourselves conquerors. This is a sickly little philosophy professor, actually, really. But we contemplate the necessity for new orders. We contemplate the necessity for new orders as well as for a new slavery. We contemplate the necessity of a new slavery. For every strengthening and enhancement of the human type, involves a new type of enslavement, doesn't it? With all this, can we really be at home in an age that loves to claim the distinction of being the most humane, the mildest, the most righteous age the sun has ever seen? It is bad enough that precisely when we hear those beautiful words, we have the ugliest misgivings. What we find in them is merely an expression and the masquerade of a deep weakening, of weariness, old age, declining energies. He's calling for a new virility over and over again. He says that this equal rights stuff and this idea of progress is castrating. He says the whole purpose of the civilization now, this is called a liberal civilization, is to geld you. All right, geld the free spirit, the potential free spirit and stuff. Now, I don't know how I heard this as a teenage boy. Pretty exciting, actually, I think. And maybe I was nodding along, although I got to say, I very early had misgivings about Nietzsche and politics, of course. All right, but this is like the manosphere of now, which has a neo-fascist little flavor to it, doesn't it? Okay, so this is how we're going to travel to the dark side. Your all your equal rights, your wokeness or whatever is castrating. And so we're going to reassert a virile politics, a vigorous politics, and a new form of slavery in order to partly to breed new kinds of people that will be joyously affirmative of the whole future. Well, it's not surprising in a way that Nietzsche flirts with the dark side of politics, or more than flirts, runs into it full bore. Because he kind of goes into the dark side of everything, and he often comes back with, he's often enabled by that to doubt what everyone else assumes and to show that it's bullshit. His critiques of, his genealogy of morals, for instance, where he suspects that Christian morality rests on resentment. And his arguments to that effect, historical arguments to that effect, amazingly compelling, but also, amazingly dark. This idea that he is always talking about the abyss, and where you no longer have concepts of good and evil, and everything you thought was steady is melting away. That's the moment of possible creativity of new values for Nietzsche. But it's also, and it's also like the darkness, the sublimity of the aesthetic of the Nazis and shit. Right, like Nazis produced a lot of bad art, but they had a very aesthetic politics that has a kind of Nietzschean flavor of this darkness, this lightning strike, this we are here to affirm a new slavery. We have a new freedom but every form of new freedom rests on a new slavery. Now, I want to say like the nationalism of the Nazis, German nationalism, Nietzsche would sneer. Okay, the racialism of the Nazis. I mean, actually, I have a quote here somewhere. Like one thing I'll never deal with is the race poison. This is in Genealogy of Morals, I think. Should I find this? Well, maybe I don't have this passage handy, but he says something like, "One thing I'll never fault." Well, I mean, actually, I found something else instead of this race poisoning, the poison of the race concept you should ignore. That the manliest men should rule. This is only the natural order of things. And somehow I think like Elon Musk thinks that. Not that he's necessarily the manliest of men, but he's trying to manifest that, and like this sort of like adolescent boys love Nietzsche. Adolescent boys might end up flirting with fascism. Okay. Which seems macho and seems independent at a certain point and stuff. Okay. But does have the effect of throwing into doubt a whole bunch of assumptions that other people take for granted that might be very questionable indeed. So that's Nietzsche. I'm not simply accusing him of totalitarianism, although I am accusing him of being a number of totalitarians' favorite philosopher for reasons that are comprehensible, although not dispositive. We're going to go on now to Heidegger, and I'm going to have to do some reading. I'm reading like the book Heidegger in Ruins by Wolin. I'm going to try to look at some of the Black Notebooks. I haven't really grappled with Heidegger and the Nazis. Of course, Heidegger admired Nietzsche amazingly. All right. So this is another thing to be worried about. And it's also a question with regard to Heidegger. It's like, can we extricate the rather amazing philosophy, like same with Nietzsche, though, I guess, from the political convictions or not? And how are they connected? All right, till then, that might be a week or so.